for the first year, but I do have a lot of experience. Okay, so what we're looking at is Ruach Chaim. Everyone knows the famous sefer of Chaim Volozhiner, Nefesh HaChaim, again published after his death, but side by side with Nefesh HaChaim, there's Ruach HaChaim, right? Nefesh, Ruach, etc. And Ruach Chaim is basically his Shiurim on Pirkei Avos, and Rav Yitzchak of Volozhin, who was Rav Chaim Volozhiner's son, says that these are based on Shiurim that his father would give on the Shabbos that we read Pirkei Avos. But l'chayra, unlike, for example, let's say the Perish Hagain on Mishlei, which are not the Vilna Gaon's own words. These are notes that people made of the Vilna Gaon's Torah. Ruach Chaim seems to be Rav Chaim Volozhiner's own words. In other words, afterwards he wrote down. So this is mamish his lashon. And Ruach Chaim is maybe not as hard as Nefesh HaChaim, but also it's not the easiest sefer. Pirkei Avos has other perushim that might be a little easier to follow, but there are many beautiful nekudas in it, and a lot of the teachings of the Gra are indirectly in the Ruach Chaim as well. So today we're going to look basically look at the first mission. Now Pirkei Avos, always begins. When you recite it, it begins with something that's not part of Pirkei Avos at all, and that is, let me just turn this on. And that's the first Mishnah in Perek Yud Aleph of Sanhedrin, which is not part of Pirkei Avos. It's from Sanhedrin, and that's the famous statement, Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek li'olam haba. Every Jew has a chelek towards olam haba. Of course, and it brings a pasuk, Amech kulam tzadikim, that all of Klal Yisrael are righteous. But of course, this is only a partial quote because the immediate sentence right after Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek l'olam haba is v'yelu she'ein lehem chelek, and then it gives you a big list of people that don't have a chelek in olam haba. But be this it may, the minhag Yisrael was that we're maschil learning of Pirkei Avos with the mission of Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek l'olam haba, so that a Jew should be inspired, not give up, know that there's hope. Know that every Yid is beloved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore has a tikkun. Now here, Rav Chaim Volozhiner does have a comment, even though this is not part of Pirkei Avos itself, the idea of chelek le'olam haba, and here he is marich on something that he actually talks about in Nefesh HaChaim also, so there's a lot of overlap. And he says, olam haba is not like a place where your neshama goes, but each person creates b'mitzius his olam haba, and the other way around as well. Each person creates his gehenim. What is the pshat? That when a person does mitzvahs, he brings down a shefa, which is an aura of kedusha, that surrounds him and protects him while he's doing the mitzvah. But when he finishes the mitzvah, that ruach is nistalek, and when that ruach is nistalek, it goes to Shemayim, and that becomes the basis for his olam haba. So I do mitzvahs, I do different things. Every single time I generate a ruach mimarim that comes down. And the ruach mimarim has two different functions. Number one, it gives me the siyata dishmaya to do the mitzvah. So when I'm machlit to do a mitzvah, there's a kayach that comes that gives me siyata dishmaya. And number two, it also protects me from shluchei mitzvah einam nizaken. The Gemara says when you're doing a mitzvah, you're given protection. That protection is from that ruach. But that ruach is only temporary. It's temporary while you're doing the mitzvah. Unlike, right, the Gemara is machalek in Saita between limud haTorah and shmiras hamitzvahs. That limud haTorah gives you a shmira even when you're not learning. It has a continual effect. Mitzvahs give you shmira only when you're actually isek in the mitzvah itself. Right? That's a nafkamina between Torah and mitzvahs. But be it as it may, when you finish the mitzvah, that ruach mimarim it doesn't just disappear, it rather retreats to Shemayim, where it becomes your olam haba. So you make your olam haba, right? The more I do, the more mitzvahs I do, and who adin if I'm poresh from averos, that will also be nichlal, because it says avar adam avar avera ki'ilu asa mitzvah. So that's my olam haba. And Gehenim is the same thing. Every time I'm machlit to do something bad, there's a ruach, so to speak, right? Chazal say, "B'derech shadem ratzei leilech," the way that a person wants to go, ma'lichin, I say. So that you understand, ma'lichin, I say, Hashem will give you a spirit that will lead you more in that direction. That's kind of a negative siyata d'shmaya. A person wants to do averos, Hashem is not going to stop you. The Kadosh Baruch Hu will give you a siyua in your averos, and that becomes your Gehenim later. The Gehenim is the feeling of being cut off from Hashem, and that's that Ruach HaTuma. So Mameli says that's why he's Medayek Rav Chaim. Kol Yisrael have a chelek li Eilam haba. It doesn't say Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek bi Eilam haba. If it would say Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek bi Eilam haba, that would imply Eilam haba is this thing, and I have a chelek in that thing. But if the pshat is I build my Eilam haba, then that's li Eilam haba. Everybody has a share in the building of their Eilam haba. So that's the main nekuda that Rav Chaim makes on this Mishnah, that every person makes his own Eilam haba, every person makes his own Gehenim, that essentially it is simply literally a reflection of the life that you led, the decisions that you made, the mitzvahs and averos that you did. Now, of course, if you remember from the Even Shlema, the Gemara made a very beautiful point that Rav Chaim does not make in particular over here. That is, in Hashem's Rachamim, there's a very big nafkamina between the Gehenim for Averis and the Zechar for mitzvahs. And that is, the Gehenim for Averis, by definition, is normally temporary. We say that even a Rosh Hashanah is only in Gehenim for 12 months. That's why we only say Kaddish for 11 months, because we don't want to be machzik a parent to be a Rosh Hashanah. So 12 months is bad. 1 second of Gehenim is bad, but it's 12 months. What happens after the 12 months? After the 12 months, even the Rosh Hashanah gets a sechar in Eilam haba for whatever mitzvahs he did. And for Keret, that's going to be nitzchias. Now, since you make your Eilam haba, so it may be a very shvach Eilam haba, but afilu hachi, it's still an Eilam haba, that's some type of kesher to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's going to be forever. So this is a very important point. Punishment is temporary. Reward is eternal. Now, if you're a person who's not zeichet Eilam haba, that's a separate issue, but the Rambam says, putting aside the people that ein lahem chelek l'olam haba, but derech klal, even a Rosh Hashanah will have a chelek in Eilam haba because of his zechuyos after he becomes purified through the Yisurin of Gehenim. So it's an important thing to keep in mind, that the Rasha also goes to Eilam haba, but the Eilam haba will be, it's like bleacher seats versus seats right at the court, full court seats or whatever they call it, and the like. Okay, so that's, and again, Rav Chaim says this in Nefesh HaChaim as well. A person creates his Eilam haba, a person creates his Gehenim. Now, as I say, this is not part of Pirkei Avos itself. This is the Hakdama to give people chizuk and inspiration that they should grow from the teachings. Now, Pirkei Avos itself, again, just little information. It's in the Mishnah, obviously, and Pirkei Avos has 6 prakim, but you have to know that the Mishnayos are only 5 prakim. The 6th perek is a brisa that was then added to be read with the Mishnayos of Pirkei Avos, because how does the 6th perek begin? Shanu chachamim b'lashen ha-mishnah baruch shebachar b'hem v'mishnasem. The chachamim taught the following in the style of the Mishnah, blessed art they and their Mishnah. So it's a brisa which is a continuation of Pirkei Avos, because it talks about the chashivas of limud haTorah, but Pirkei Avos itself is only 5 prakim. So thus, for example, the Rambam, who has a Perish of Mishnayos, there is no Perish of Mishnayos on the 6th perek of Avos, because the 6th perek of Avos is not Mishnah. On the other hand, the other Mefarshim will simply write on Maseches Avos, since it, lav dafka Mishnah, since the 6th perek is learned with Maseches Avos, so they add it. They write the Perish as well. Rav Chaim Taka will have on the 6th perek of Avos as well. Now it begins with a very, very abbreviated Mesiras HaTorah, the order of how the Torah was transmitted from different generations. It doesn't give you too many specific names, but it starts off, famous statement, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, Moshe got the Torah miSinai. Now, l'chayra, he didn't get it from Sinai, he got it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? The mountain didn't tell him the Torah. So what's the Lashon? Moshe got the Torah miSinai. So again, Rav Chaim Volozhiner explains, and this is almost a Pashat Pshat, that the Maila of Har Sinai, right? Har Sinai is a very small, it's not really a mountain, it's a hill. And there are many, many mountains that are much higher than Har Sinai. And yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose Har Sinai because the very fact that it was humble and was not very high means that you're Zeicha B'Torah through Anava. And that's indeed Moshe Rabbeinu's greatest quality. Moshe Rabbeinu was the Un of Mikol Adam. So the Mishnah means Moshe was Zeicha to be Makabel Torah because he had the attribute of Sinai that was lowly and humble. And that was the zechus whereby Moshe merited to be Makabel the Torah. Now you may ask a simple question. So we say Hashem chooses Har Sinai because it's the lowest mountain, but it's still a mountain. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to pick the example of total anava, total humility, he said, should have given you the Torah, a 10-foot pit or whatever it would be. Why? It's still a mountain. So the answer once again is that the Torah is merames here, that a person has to be humble, modest, but a person also has to be makir, his godless. You have to be makir your madrega. If you really think you're nothing, if you really think you're worthless, you're not going to be able to be Zeicha the Torah either, because your attitude is going to be, what difference does it make what I do? Who am I? I'm a nobody. Hashem's going to care if I do a mitzvah, right? So that's the remez. You got to be a mountain, but you should be a lowly mountain, so to speak. And this is a famous statement of Rabbunim B'Prashischa, the Hasidic statement, that you have to have the two ideas in your pocket. One is Anochi Ofer V'Efer, I am dust and ashes. My anava, I'm a nothing, I'm a nobody. Bishvili Nivra Ha'ilam, because of me the whole world was created. Hashem made many dogs and many cats, but only one man, one woman. Each person says Bishvili Nivra Ha'ilam. So you see that in Har Sinai itself. It's the lowest mountain, but at the same time, it is still a mountain. So Moshe, Kibel Torah miSinai, is merames that Moshe's kayach to be makabel the Torah came from his anava. Why is anava such a t'nai in Kabbalah Torah? So it is relatively simple, although there are deeper reasons too. When a person is an anav, he is not filled with his egotism and his gaiva. Memela, he's mevatel himself to Hashem, because he's not into his kavod. And not only that, but he's also willing to learn from people, right? A person, a chacham, is lomed mikol adam. Without anava, you're not going to learn from people. You're going to be, you think you know it all, or you'll be embarrassed to be maida, you don't know pshat in something, etc. Right? That's also going to be an issue. So memela, anava is really a tanai, to be able to learn Torah, to understand Torah, to ask questions if something is not clear to you, not to be so worried about the reputation, which all of us, worry about it one way or the other. So that allows a person to be makabel Torah. There's a picture, this is great advertising, of Rev Yoshev, Zichrono Livracha, looking at a Schattenstein, a Hebrew art scroll, a Hebrew. It's lucky he's not Talmud nor Sameach. They would arrest him. But he was looking at a Schattenstein art scroll. What's the pshat, Rav Yoshev, Gadol Hador? The answer is, the cheshbon is that these are Avrechim who went through the sugya. Maybe they have some ha'ara that might be a chiddush. And his avas haTorah was so great that he would look and see, maybe they said something that would be good. Whether they did or not, whether he learned something new or not, I don't know. I actually probably doubt that he did. But the point was, it's like the Gemara says by fish, that Yaakov blessed Ephraim and Menashe. V'yidgu l'roiv b'kerev ha'aretz. They should be like fish. So there are a lot of reasons why you compare them to fish. Fish are in the water. There's no ayin hara against fish. They should not have ayin hara. But there's a medrash that says the following. By a fish lives in water. Fish lives in water. And yet when it rains, and you see raindrops in the water, the fish runs to get a little bit of drop of rain, even though it's lagamri surrounded in water. He says, this should be your avas Torah. That even if you're totally surrounded with learning all the time, every time there's something a little bit new, you rush up to get it. That was Rav Elyashiv. He's looking at. So again, I don't know if our school ever used it in advertising, but that's advertising. If you want to advertise your products, even Rav Elyashiv, I'll give you another muscle the other way. It's when Bar Ilan has. This is before there was Yitzchak Chachma, but Bar Ilan still sells the product. They have like a computer thing which accesses 900 volumes of Shelos Teshuvos. It specializes in Shelos Teshuvos. So you could type in something, some Shaila, and it'll give you like every tshuva ever written on the subject. So when they first came out with this was like 40 years ago, a long time ago. So they wanted to test it against what a person would come up with. So they had Rav Yosef, who knew all of the tshuvas, and they were boasting in their advertisements. They say, our program is so good that we got 9 out of the 10 that Rav Avadia came up with. That was their boast. Avadia was better than the computer. So this is, these are the Gedolei Torah. So that's Moshe Kibel Torah mi Sinai, from the quality of Sinai, which is Anava. So then it tells us, Umasra li Yeshua. He was Meiser the Torah to Yoshua. Now, obviously, we have to know what that means exactly. Moshe Rabbeinu was Meiser the Torah to Gans Klal Yisrael. I mean, all of the Jewish people were makabel the mitzvahs. What is this notion of a Mesiras HaTorah? So the emes is, if you look, you have to look more be'arichas, much more than the Mishnah is mariched. Look in the Hakdama of the Rambam to the Mishnah Torah. And the Hakdama of the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam gives you 40 generations from Moshe Rabbeinu to Rav Ashi, the Chasimas Hashas. And he says, these are the Balei Mesaira of Torah Shebaal Peh. So it mentions Shmuel Hanavi, different people. Now, once again, you could ask the question, what exactly, and apparently this is an important thing. And the Rambam specifically wanted to give you what's called a chain of custody. Like, who are the Balei Mesaira from Moshe Rabbeinu all the way to Ravina and Rav Ashi. This was an important thing. I mean, Chaim Kanievsky used to tell people they have to memorize this order of Mesiras HaTorah. Now, what does that even mean? I mean, the Torah was never given to one person and then to another person, then to another person. The Torah was given to Klal Yisrael. Some people learned it, maybe some people didn't learn it, whatever it is, but the Torah was always for everybody to learn. So what's the pshat? So the answer has to be that Ein Achinami Avada, the Torah was a mitzvah for everybody to learn, or at least the men to learn. But there were custodians, there were designated custodians who were the Balei Mesaira, meaning they were the official preservers of the Mesaira. So if there was any doubt what the halacha Moshe Sinai was, they would be the ones who were designated to be machriya those fekas. Just like lahavdil, in weights and measures, there is an official inch, an official meter, meaning in different government offices. Like, what exactly is a meter? Is it this thing or that thing? So everything is because of this measure. For Sifrei Torah, the Sefer Torah in the Kodesh HaKadoshim was the official Torah. That when there was machleksim how to write a Sefer Torah, they were allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and take out the Torah and check it, even not on Yom Kippur. That was a heter to be nichnas to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, to be machriya Sifrei Torah. So the Balei Mesaira are very, very important, because the Balei Mesaira were the official preservers of the Mesaira of Torah Shebaal Peh. And therefore, if there was any suffix of what the Torah Shebaal Peh said, they would be the ones that would be the machriyim. Now, does that mean they never made a mistake? I mean, lav dafka, because the Sanhedrin itself could determine keneged one of the Balei Mesaira, but b'derech klal, they were considered to be reliable. So when it says Moshe gave the Torah to Yoshua, it essentially means that Yoshua was the Baal Mesaira, who was in charge of maintaining the integrity of Torah Shebaal Peh. Now, Rav Chaim points out, as many Mefarshim point out, that the Mishnah changes Lushonis here, because it starts off with Moshe being Makabel, And then it says, Meiser to Yoshua. So it switches from receiving to giving. Now, the Mishnah could have been consistent. It could have said, for example, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Masar Torah l'Moshe Umasra liYeshua. It could have used Masira all the way through, in which case it would have started with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He would have been the first Meiser. Or the other way around, if you don't want to just make Hashem part of a list, maybe on some level that's not so coveted, you could just use the word Kabbalah all the way around. Moshe kibel Torah misinai, v'kibel mimenu Yehoshua, v'kibel mimenu Zekanim, etc. Right? So there is a switch here. That Lagabe Moshe, we describe it b'Kabbalah, and Lagabe everybody else, we describe it as Mesira. So why is there a change in Lashon? So Rav Chaim says the idea is the following. Rav Chaim says that the idea of Kabbalah, when you're a Makabel, that means you're a Makabel everything that the person or the entity wants to give you. If I want to give you 10 gallons of something, so when it says you're Makabel, that means you're Makabel 10 gallons. The Lashon of Mesira implies I'm giving it to you, but you're not able to be Makabel everything. Meaning there'll be a little spillage. Okay? So if it says you were Makabel 10 gallons, that means you have 10 gallons. If you say I was Meiser 10 gallons to you, maybe you don't have 10 gallons. Maybe you only have 9 gallons because something spilled. So the Mishnah is Merame, says Rav Chaim, to the Bechin of Niskatnu Haderis. Moshe Rabbeinu Bishlei Musai was Makabel every single thing HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give him. Once we go already to Yehoshua, there's a Mesira Satira, but there will also be a Shichacha, a certain amount of forgetfulness, and a certain lack of clarity. In fact, the Gemara in Tamura says a very disheartening thing in some ways. Right before Moshe Rabbeinu died, he asked Yehoshua, I'm about to die. Are there any shilas, anything you don't understand, anything that I could clarify for you? Last chance. Yehoshua said to Moshe Rabbeinu, he says, Rebbe, I've been with you all the time. I've never separated myself from you. Everything has been clarified. Baruch Hashem. And Moshe Rabbeinu dies, and immediately it says that there were like 1,000 Kal V'chaimers and Gzeir Shabbos and all sorts of stuff that Yehoshua had forgotten. All of a sudden, he had forgotten. Didn't remember. In fact, it says the people wanted to kill him. I mean, this is his job, is to preserve the Torah. He forgot a lot of stuff. And the Gemara in Tzmura says, Osniel ben Kenaz, who was actually the first of the Shaftim after Yoshua, but even in Yoshua's lifetime, he was obviously an Adam Gadol Ma'od, was Machshir, the Kal V'chomers and all those things with the Kayach of Pilpul. Svara, Pilpul, the Yud Gimel Midais, even though Yoshua had originally got it as a direct Halacha L'Moshe Misinai, it had to be reconstructed al Yedei Pilpul, and that was the greatness of Osniel ben Kenaz, who was able to be machzir a large part of the Torah. But Memela, Rav Chaim says, that's why it's umasra, because the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu was makabel b'shleimus was nimser to Yoshua with a certain amount of chisaron, and from then on, there's always going to be a little bit of a chisaron. In other words, everybody after Moshe is a lashon of Mesira. That's a reflection, of course, of Niskatnu Hadairis. Obviously, in our time, the Niskatnu Hadairis is much stronger. It goes down much, much more. But even in the time of Nevi'im and great tzaddikim, there was a certain element of Niskatnu Hadairis. People ask sometimes, just as an agav, well, does Niskatnu Hadairis mean that, let's say, a regular Ha'aretz Jew 2,000 years ago was like so much greater than our Gedolei Hador, whatever? That's lav dafka. I don't think Niskatnu Hadairis ever meant that every single Yid from the past was greater than every single Yid today. But it means, Gedolim, the greatness, the spiritual greatness of those who were great would be greater than the spiritual greatness of Heintika Gedolim. So in terms of the classification, so we go from Moshe to Yoshua. From Yoshua, we go to the Zekanim. This is a reference in Sefer Yoshua that after Yeshua died, there were Zikanim. These were the elders. They were members of the Sanhedrin. Some of them were actually so old that they were already from the Midbar, and this can encompass a very long time. It says they were Marich Yamim way after Yeshua, and the Zikanim could include some of the Shaftim as well. Meaning to say, Shaftim are not mentioned here simply because not all Shaftim were Maisrei HaTorah Shebal Peh. Some were, some weren't. So Zikanim is a collective term for those who were the Balei Messiah, and the Rambam will give you, for example, in the category of Zikanim, he'll give you 10 generations of different people. So the mission is not really getting into the detail there. The Zikanim, who were Marich Yamim Achar Yeshua, eventually turned it over to the Nevi'im. Now this is already a very interesting point. Many Nevi'im, and go back to the Rambam's list. If you really want to understand this mission in detail, you need to go to the Hakdama of the Rambam, to the Mishnah Torah, because then he specifies the generations. But there were many Nevi'im that are Baalei Messiah. And this raises an interesting question that you got to clarify. And that is, in many ways, Nevi'im are specifically not the ones that are Koveya the Halacha or the Torah Shebal Peh, because that's the principle of Loi B'Shamayim, right? If a Navi comes to you, and a Navi, and he's Muchsuk, we know he's a Navi. He's been a Navi in the past. He's done miracles. He's been approved. He has his Navi's license from the Sanhedrin. He's been certified as a Navi. And he tells you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to me. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that from now on we should keep Shabbos on Sunday. So no matter what miracles he does, and no matter what track record he has, he is called a Navi Sheker. Why is he called a Navi Sheker? Because a Navi does not have the Kayach to contradict the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's either, the Gemara has two different psukim or two different maimarim that it quotes. Sometimes it calls it Lo B'Shamayim, which is a pasuk. Other times it says Ein HaNavi Rishoi L'Chadesh Davar. But be it as it may, therefore, the person is a Navi Sheker because he's Makrish Nevuaseh Shel Moshe Rabbeinu. He is a liar. Now, the exception is, the Rambam says, that a Navi, if he is a Navi, is allowed to permit a violation of the Torah if it's a Hiras Shah, a temporary emergency thing. The classic example is Eliyahu Bahara Carmel. When Eliyahu is fighting the Nevi'im of the Baal, so in order to discredit the Ovdei HaBaal, so remember they built a Mizbeach on Har Carmel, and he built a Mizbeach, and they're calling to the Baal to answer them, and he calls to Hashem to bring down Eish Min HaShamayim, and Eish comes down Min HaShamayim, and it burns Eliyahu's korban, and everybody does tshuva, and they say, Hashem hu Elokim, Hashem hu Elokim, Gevaldik. That tshuva lasted exactly one day, but nevertheless, at least at that moment, it was a Gevaldik tshuva. Now the problem is that there's a Beis HaMikdash. In Eliyahu Navi's time, there's a Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. If you bring korbanos outside of the Beis HaMikdash, you're chayiv kares. That's an issue d'oraisa called shechutei chutz, Parshas Acharei Mos. So how can Eliyahu Navi build a mizbeach and bring korbanos chutz to the Yerushalayim? The answer is that's called Hiras Shah. Hiras Shah is a one-time thing. Hiras Shah is legitimately within the power of a Navi, but to be Mechadesh HaHalacha, not. Now, the rule that a Navi cannot be Mechadesh HaHalacha is taken even further. Not only can a Navi not contradict the Torah, unless it's a Hiras Shah, a Navi cannot even be Machriya in a Machlokes. He's not going Keneged the Torah, he's just telling you which man the Amr to Paskin like. And this is, of course, the famous Maisa in Bava Metzia, B'tanor Shalachnoi, a certain tanor, whether it's Makabel Tuma or not Makabel Tuma. So if you remember, Rabbi Eliezer said the tanor is Tohar, and he refused to go with the Chachamim's view, and he did a lot of miracles. The tree moved, and the water changed its course, and the Kaistei Beis HaMedrash came down, and the Chachamim say we don't listen to miracles. And then there was a Bas Kol Min HaShamayim, that said Halachik Rabbi Eliezer, and they said to the Bas Kol, we don't listen to you either. you said lo b'shamayim. Now that's an interesting chiddush because Rabbi Eliezer was not going kineged the Torah. He was simply being mishtamish v'bas kol to be machriya a machlekes and halacha. So you see that lo b'shamayim is not only legabe contradicting a mitzvah, but it's even to be machriya. A part of that might be because that gufa is kineged the Torah, because if the Torah says acharei rabim lahates, so for you to then bring a brasko to say the halacha is like a das yachid, that itself might be kineged the Torah. I mean, you could look at it that way as well. But be it as it may, given the fact that a Navi has a very limited role in halacha, he can neither change the halacha nor can he be machriya in a machlekes. So it is interesting that the Nevi'im are listed as a very significant chelek of the Mesiras Torah Shebal Peh. In Pirkei Avos it says Nevi'im, and the Rambam will list Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, specific Nevi'im as Meisrei Torah Shebal Peh. But the answer is that a Navi can exist in multiple capacities. A Navi is a Navi, but a Navi can also be, and would often be, a Talmid Chacham, a Gadol. So when the Navi is Meiser Halacha, he is not Meiser the Halacha b'Teiras Nevuah, he is Meiser the Halacha b'Teiras Chachma. And just because he's a Navi, we're not going to take that away from him. In fact, it's interesting, even HaKadosh Baruch Hu can participate as a Chacham. It's fascinating. You know, there is a sefer from the Balei HaTaisus that is called Sheilas Utshuvais Min HaShamayim. One of the Balei Taisus. What is Sheilas Utshuvais Min HaShamayim? That this person had dreams, chalaimais, where he would ask Sheilas of Hashem or Malachim, and they would give him answers. And in the morning, when he would get up, he would write down the questions and the answers Min HaShamayim on halachic matters of halacha. So the Welt does ask the kasha, how could this be relevant bichlal? Quite literally, he's getting his answer min hashamayim. That's mamish lo b'shamayim. The teretz is like this. If the answers just would have been Hashem said osir, Hashem said mutter, yeah, that's lo b'shamayim. Even HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bound by the Torah and he can't be machriya. We have our own halachas of being machriya. But that's not what this does. This goes through the pilpul. This goes through the sources. It says, according to Tosfos, it'll be this. According to Ramban, it'll be this. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the right to say it all as well. Hashem says, based on the Rambam and the Ramban and the Raavad, this, I think, should be the maskana. Are you going to say HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have the right to add to the Shakla of a Beis HaMedrash? He does. But what's interesting is, it sounds funny to say it, he sits here equally with everybody else. Meaning to say, we don't always paskin like Sheilas Utshuvas Min HaShamayim. If the paiskim feel that this is not the strongest argument, again, it's so hard to understand. It says, we're not makabel. So Hashem can also come into the Beis Medrash, but he doesn't come in as God. He comes in as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is chadi, he has simcha, bilpapula, the araisa. Right? So that's the role of the Navi. So the Navi has two functions. As a Chacham, he's a Baal Messiah of Torah Shebal Peh, for sure. As a Navi, he's there to give Musar, to give Teichacha, to give Chizuk, to give warning. That's the prophetic function. But the prophetic function is actually not a halachic function. See, it's two different things. Lo b'shamayim is magdir that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not want Divrei Torah to be decided by Nevuah or by Ruach HaKodesh or by Baskols, or whatever it is, because that would be makchish, that would undermine the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is one of the Ikrei Emunah, that the Nevuah of Moshe will not be muchlefes. In fact, this idea of the finality of the Torah is so significant that it actually is the main reason why a Jew cannot be a Christian. People say, there are, unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, there are Messianic Jews, right? There are Jews who practice Christianity. And not only are there Jews who practice Christianity, but there are Jews who seem to be from Jews that practice this Christianity. They'll wear tzitzis, they'll wear tefillin. Now, sometimes it's just to trick you. There's that. But there are those who are sincere. They sincerely believe in mitzvahs, but they believe that Yashka was whatever Mashiach. So, what's wrong with that? Why can't I believe that? So the truth is, the main reason why you can't believe it, so people say either it's Avodah Zarah, or believing in a false Mashiach because he got killed, and therefore, once Mashiach gets killed, he can't be Mashiach anymore. Although that's going to raise a Chabad question with that, of course. But the real reason is that, and maybe it's not even Yeshka's fault. Maybe it came after Yeshka with Paul, is the idea that the Torah is no longer binding. That's why the Christian Bible is called the New Testament, because it's essentially abrogated. Same thing with Islam. What's Islam's claim? Islam is Maida. There was a Matan Torah. Christianity is Maida. There was a Matan Torah. They say that. In fact, Rabbi Gottlieb points out, people, most of the world believes Hashem gave the Torah at Har Sinai, because it's not just the religious Jews. All Christians believe that, and all Muslims believe that. Elamai, they say it was superseded. It was superseded by a later revelation to a greater prophet. That we bedafka cannot be makabel, because that would be makrish, the nevuasai shel Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, the period of Nevi'im is very long, and it lasts until the very beginning of the Bayis Sheni. After the Churban, then you have the Bayis Sheni. Tanakh ends, essentially, with the building of the Bayis Sheni. That's kind of the end of Tanakh. The end of Nach is that point. And the last three Nevi'im, until Nevuah died, are Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. Those are the last three Nevi'im, and they have 3 books in Trei Osar. Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And after that, Nevuah was taken away from Klal Yisrael, and it will not be returned until shortly before Bias HaMashiach. It's not clear how much shortly, what is shortly. In other words, it'll come back before Mashiach, but it's not how soon it will come back. But the Gemara in Bava Basra says that all Nevuah today, if there's any Nevuah today, it is only Shaitim or Ketanim. So sometimes crazy people say things, and in their craziness, I knew this. I actually have a good friend who is crazy. I'm using it in a non-clinical way. We grew up together, and we were very close as kids. And now he's crazy, meaning he goes around and he makes speeches about Geula and Galus, but he's crazy. He goes all different places, and most of the time you don't even understand what he's saying. But once when I met him, he was making this crazy speech, and I decided I would listen. I would really try to listen for a few minutes, as opposed to just getting out of there as quick as I can. And I have to say that this crazy guy was saying some amazing things in the middle of the Meshugas. It's mamash what Chazal say, that shaitim sometimes have a certain kayach of nevuah. Children as well, ketanim have a kayach of nevuah. But other than that, we lost nevuah. Now, one thing about this, I think the Gra points out that if you remember the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, which talks about the kings that don't have a share in Olam Haba. So one of the kings that it mentions who has no chelek in Olam Haba is Menashe. Menashe was the son of the very great tzaddik Chizkiyahu HaMelech, but Menashe became king at 12, and he ruled for 52 years, so 55 years rather. So he had the longest reign, and he was chayte umachti es harabim and avodah zarah gilui arayos shvichus damim. In fact, remember the Gemara in Brachas. Chizkiyahu didn't want to get married because he had a nevuah. He would have a son Menashe, and Yeshayahu said, "It's none of your business to make cheshbonos and the like." But Kachavi, Menashe became this awful Rasha. So the Chachamim said, "Ein lo chelek li'olam haba." So that night he appeared to them in a dream, and he said, "You think you're so great? You start talking about me." He says, "Ask me any shaila in Torah that you don't understand." And they asked him in the dream all sorts of shailas, and he knew everything. He knew kol Torah kula. He was able to answer every type of shaila. They were amazed. They didn't perceive of him as such an amazing Talmid Chacham. So they then asked him. He says, "A man like you, how could you be an avodah zarah like this?" So he says, "If you would be around in my time, you would cut your legs on the thorns and rip your clothes running to the nearest idol. You don't even understand what the taiva for Avodah Zarah was. It was an unbelievable taiva, right? And you read throughout Nach, this bowing down to idols, making idols. So, what is this? I don't feel like bowing down to an idol. What is this attraction to idols? So the Gemara in Yuma says that at the time of the beginning of the Bayis Sheni, Ezra and the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, which we'll get to in a moment, they actually were mispalel that Hashem should take away the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah, meaning it was such a powerful Yetzer Hara. And it caused the Chorban. That was the main Avera that caused the Chorban, Bayis Rishon. Take it away. Now you understand, this is B'dafka, the type of thing that Hashem doesn't want to do. I mean, the one thing God doesn't want to do is take away Yetzer Haras, because that's Bechira. We have to struggle with it. So they fasted for 3 days, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu took away the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. So if we don't feel that Yetzer Hara today, it's not because we're such great tzaddikim. It's because we don't have that Yetzer Hara. Now the Gemara says there's never a vacuum. The Yetzer Hara for money replaced the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. So if you want to know how strong the Avodah Zarah thing was, so look at the taiva for money that people have. But at least it wasn't Avodah Zarah. Now, here is the point that both the Gra makes, Meshech Chochmah later elaborates on it. And that is, the beetle of the Yitzra, the Avodah Zarah, occurred at the very same time as the beetle of Nevuah. They walk in tandem. When we lose Nevuah, we lose the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah. So there's a cost. We lost something very, very precious when we lost the Yitzra, the Avodah Zarah. What's the connection between the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah and Nevuah? Why would one be dependent on the other? I mean, Nevuah is a good thing. This is a bad thing. Why would one disappear when the other disappears? So let's go back to the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah gives a very, very interesting history of how Avodah Zarah started. How did Avodah Zarah start? It's kind of a bit of a puzzle. Adam HaRishon was created by Hashem, and Adam HaRishon spoke to Hashem. So obviously what he handed down to Shais was Emunah in one Hashem. So where did the distortion come in? So the Rambam says it came in pretty early. That's the door of Enosh. Enosh is Shais' son, and Enosh is Adam HaRishon's grandson. And he says, Bimei Enosh, Ta'u Ta'is Gedayla. They made a big mistake. And what was the big mistake? They said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so great. It's not coveting. It's a chutzpah for us to turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and ask for things. So we should go to his Mishorsim. We should go to his subordinate kochos, the sun and the moon and the stars. And we worship them not to replace HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but because we're not worthy of going to God directly. So the original impetus of Avodah Zarah, it did degenerate over time, for sure. But the original impetus of Avodah Zarah was actually an attempt to give honor to Hashem by worshiping his Meshorsim. That, it's not coveting to call up the president to fix your sidewalk or whatever it is. You don't bother the president with those things. You don't bother Hashem with, I need this, I need this. I'll talk to the undersecretaries. I'll talk to the maintenance people and the like. So it turns out that the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah originally came from a very holy sense, a Kadosh sense of reverence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what happens is this. When we lose that Yetzer Hara, meaning it's kind of like, there used to be a procedure, I don't know if they do it so much, they're lobotomies, where if someone had epilepsy or seizures, so they would cut out a portion of the brain that was causing the seizures, and in that way the person wouldn't have the seizures. But when you cut out part of the brain, you're also taking out some good stuff. Like there goes the piano lessons or whatever it is. And one can look at the beetle of the Yitzra, the Avodah Zarah, as a form of spiritual lobotomy. meaning you had so much Yiras Hashem that you were afraid to approach Hashem, which on one level is a very high level, but that leads to Avodah Zarah. So we got to cut it out. But what did we lose when we cut it out? We lost that heightened Yiras Hashem. Right? How many people, this would be a new excuse not to go to davening. You can tell your Rebbe, why didn't you go to Shachris? You say, I was so seized with pachad of the godless of the Bayrei that I was not worthy to go into the Beis HaMedrash. So I didn't go, because who am I to be nichnas to HaKadosh Baruch? Well, try that excuse. I don't think it's going to work that well, because we don't have that feeling. So you see what's going on here. When we lost the Yitzra, the Avodah Zarah, we lost the intensity of emotion of Yiras Hashem, because it was dangerous. But when you lose that madrega, you lose Nevuah, because Nevuah required that particular madrega. And that is why we lost Nevuah exactly at the time that we lost the Yitzra, the Avodah Zarah. So the last Nevi'im are Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. I should point out that according to Chazal, Malachi is another name for Ezra. So the truth is that there is a Sefer Ezra in the Ksuvim, there's a Sefer Malachi in the Nevi'im, but they are, according to Chazal, they are actually the very, very same person. So Ezra, Malachi, Ezra, whatever you call him, is at the very, very end of Nevuah. And one of the things that Ezra did, returning to Eretz Yisrael after the 70 years of exile, was he wanted to create a body to maintain the Yidden and reconstitute religious life in Eretz Yisrael. And this body is called the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men or the people of the great assembly. And Chazal tell us these are 120 Zikanim, including the last Nevi'im, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And they made a lot of takanas, and Pirkei Avos will then begin Pirkei Avos with 3 teachings of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. But before we get to the actual teachings, I just want to raise just a general question. What is the relationship of the 120 members of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah and the Sanhedrin, which is 71? The Sanhedrin is what the Torah says are the supreme authority of Klal Yisrael for halachas and the like. So are the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah in addition to the Sanhedrin? Or are they an enlarged Sanhedrin? Exactly, what is the relationship between the two bodies? So the Rambam is masber that essentially, even though the Torah says the Sanhedrin Gedalah is normally 71, it is possible to have temporary expansions of the Sanhedrin if the door needs the haskama of more chachamim, legabi different takanos and gezeros. So the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah was a temporary, eventually it disbanded. It was a temporary expansion of the Sanhedrin. So as a result, therefore, whoever were the 71 members of the Sanhedrin, we don't even know exactly who they were muvla within the 120 of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. In fact, the Rambam uses this concept of expanding the Sanhedrin to be miyashiv, a good kasha. Again, that's not negay this, but it's a good Rambam to know. We have a klal in the Gemara. Ein based in Yochel Levatel Divrei based in Chaverai Elaim Kain Gadol Mimenu B'Chachmu V'Minyan. What does that mean? If a based in, meaning a Sanhedrin really, if a Sanhedrin makes a takana, or they make a gezerah, and a later Sanhedrin doesn't like that takana or gezerah, so it says they're stuck with it. They don't have the authority to repeal or abrogate what an earlier Sanhedrin did, unless they are greater in wisdom, which because of Niskatnu Hadaris will usually not be the case, and in number. If they're greater in wisdom and in number, they can repeal. So Frek the Rambam Akasha, I understand what greater in wisdom means. It's theoretically shaykh that they're greater in wisdom, although normally that's not the case. But how could you be greater in number? A Sanhedrin maxes out at 71. So says the Rambam, just like the Anshe Knesset Agdayla, it would be tachein to expand the Sanhedrin for whatever the reasons might be. And Memela, if the earlier Sanhedrin was 71 and this is expanded to 120, if they're Gadol B'chachma too, they taka would be able to repeal. In other words, that's good for the Raya. The fact that Chazal entertained the possibility that a Sanhedrin could be Gadol B'minyan implies that 71 is not a completely fixed number. Okay, so these are the Anshe Knesset Agdayla. The Anshe Knesset Agdayla are enormously important. Apparently, well, we're going to see that the last member of the last survivor of the Anshe Knesset Agdayla is the Kayin Gadol Shimon HaTzadik, right? Our street is named after him. His kever is across the street. And it's mashma that they didn't really replace anybody, meaning Ezra had 120 people. And when somebody died, you only have 19 people, meaning there were no appointments made to the Anshe Knesset Agdayla beyond the original 120. And therefore, we could say Shimon HaTzadik was the last member of the Anshe Knesset Agdayla. Because if the pshat would be, they would be appointing replacements every time, then you never run out. Right? So you see clearly that this was a static, temporary body that was intended to make takanos, and they made many, many takanos. The Shmona Esrei is the nusach of the Anshe Knesset Agdayla. All of the tefillah, all of the Seder HaTefillah, brachos, the nuschais of Birkas Hamazon, all of these standardizations of how we daven come from the Anshe Knesset Agdayla. And this was vitally important because remember, when Yidden came back to Eretz Yisrael, it was only a small number of Yidden that came back. Most remained in Galus. And the land was desolate, and there was intermarriage. And there were people who were not keeping Shabbos. There needed to be a structure in place to build up Torah, build up Yiddishkeit, build up Yidden. And that structure were the Anshe Knesset Hagdayla. And the Gemara in Yuma says an interesting thing. Why are they called Gedayla? The men of the great assembly. Anshe Knesset or whatever. So it says, because they were Machzer Atara Liyeshna, they returned the old Nusach back. Because originally, when Moshe Rabbeinu praised Hashem in the Torah, so he calls him Hakel HaGadol HaGibor VaHanayra. And that's why we incorporate that praise because of Moshe Rabbeinu. But by the Chorban Beis HaMikdash, some people took out HaGibor. How can I describe Hashem as a Gibor when he lets the enemies desecrate the temple and exile his people? Where is the Gevura of HaKadosh Baruch? The Anshe Knesset Hagdayla were Machsir, Gibor, to the Tefillah, because they said, this is Gufa, the Gevura of Hashem, that he lets the enemies do bad things and does not respond immediately so that they should lose their Olam Haba. I mean, Ezeo Giver HaKayvesh Es Yitzray, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol, was Kayvesh Es Yitzray by not just destroying them immediately. So they're called Gedayla because they were Machzir, the Shevach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'mkaimai. Right? So the Anshe Knesset Agdayla are very, very important, but it was a limited duration, probably less than 100 years. Okay, that's what you're talking about. Okay, so Pirkei Avos then begins, the very first teaching of Pirkei Avos. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Before I get to that, let me just mention a HaRav of the Bartanura, Rav Avadrin Bartanura. And that is, he says, Pirkei Avos is about Musar, it's about Midas. It's not about halacha so much. So why do you talk about the Mesiras HaTorah in Pirkei Avos? I mean, maybe put this at Maseches Brachos. When you begin Mishnah, talk about the Mesira of Torah Shebaal Peh. Why would it be miyuchad in Pirkei Avos to put the Seder of how the Torah was handed down from different generations? So this is what the Bartanura says. He says a very interesting thing. Since Pirkei Avos are not in Yanim of Halacha, they're in Yanim of Midas and Musar and Derech Eretz. So you might have a Hava Amina that the Chachamim just made them up. Meaning, all right, halachos we get from Moshe Rabbeinu, we pass them down. But midos, derech eretz, like self-help books, right? People write Stephen Covey, whatever it will be. So Dale Carnegie. So this is Chazal or like Dale Carnegie, whatever it will be. So the Mishnah wants to be madgish that part of the Torah Shabbat Peh that was Nimshur to Moshe, says the Breitowitz, is not only the halachas psukais, but even the inyanim of midas and derech eretz. No, he doesn't mean the language of the Chachamim was handed down. Avada, every Chacham articulated the language in their own way. It's not like Rabbi Akiva was told to say these words, but the ideas and the rayain and the machshava and the aside of these midas were nimser to Moshe b'Sinai as well. So that's why there's more of a need to say it in Pirkei Avos than another Masechta, b'dafka, because it's not a matter of fixed halacha. That is what the Bartanura says. So now let's look quickly. We'll be marking this next week. Hey Mamre Shleisha Devarim. Now they did many things, but in terms of Musar and Midas, there were three primary teachings from the Anshe Knesset Hagdela. Teaching number one is Havu Mesunim Badin. Be deliberate and patient in halacha, meaning when you have a shaila, don't rush. Take your time. Think it out. Be careful. To be matun is to be careful and deliberate, because human beings are prone to mistake, and even people who are very, very learned can make mistakes when you rush too quickly. Take your time to be sure that your hachra is emes liamite. And even then, there's no guarantee that it is, but the probabilities are much, much higher when you take your time. There actually is a saying among military surgeons that I heard. Sometimes people get hurt in battlefields, and the doctor has to do some emergency surgery, like sew up an artery or something. A person could die. So they say, you can do it in 2 minutes if you don't rush. Meaning, you try to rush, then chas v'sholem, you mess up, and then the person can die. If you don't rush, you'll be able to do it in the right amount of time. So that's having masunim bedin. The second is hamidu talmidim harbe. Make a lot of talmidim, meaning try to be marbitz Torah as much as you can. Don't just focus on your own learning, but have an achrayas to be marbitz talmidim, because they will then spread. Talmidim have talmidim. There are going to be ripple effects. They tell a beautiful story. There was a great Rosh Yeshiva of Torah V'das, who was a Talmud Muvak of Rav Baruch Ber, Rav Shlomo Hyman. Shlomo Hyman was the Talmud Muvak of Rav Baruch Ber, and he came to America before World War II, and he became Rosh Yeshiva of Torah V'das. And he had been a big Rosh Yeshiva in Vilna. Big yeshiva in Vilna. He had 500 Talmidim, whatever. He comes to Torah V'das, and in those days it was very small. He was giving shiur to 5 people. Just 5 people. And he was as animated as he was when he was giving shiur to 500 people. So a chaver walked by and sees him talking to 5 people, going with all sorts of enthusiasm. So he said to him, Rav Shlomo, I don't understand. I understand why you were so excited when you're talking to 500 people. Here you're talking to 5 people. 2 of them might be asleep. Like, what is the geschmack here? So, it's not really a kasha, but this is what the person said. So Rav Shlomo Hyman said the following. He says, you think I'm teaching 5 people? I'm not teaching 5 people. These 5 people are going to get married. They're going to have mishpachas. They're going to have children. The children will have children. They'll grow up to be marbitzei Torah too. I am teaching the 10,000 Talmidim that are going to come out of these 5 people. This is the story of Rabbi Akiva, by the way. Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 Talmidim, and he started again with only 5. Now, he was not a young man when he lost his 24,000 Talmidim. And you'd figure he would be depressed and he would retire. Like, what is he supposed to do? His life's work went down the drain. A tragedy. But he says, no, I'll start with 5. Now, somebody might look at this old man who lost his whole yeshiva, gigantic yeshiva, and now he's learning with 5 people. Like, what's the purpose? Well, I mean, what does he think he's accomplishing? But you know that from those 5 people, included Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the whole Torah Shabbal Peh comes down from those 5 people. So every person who learns Mishnah Gemara is because of those 5 Talmidim. So that's exactly what Ohr Somayach is saying. I'm not teaching 5 people. I'm teaching all that will come out of them. And therefore, Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, try to have as many Talmidim as you can. You never know who's going to be the one. Who's going to be the one that'll carry the Messiah forward. Some of them might not, but someone will. So you have as many as you can. Now, Rav Chaim Volozhin here, though, says a very beautiful thing, b'derech drush a little bit. Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, maimed, meaning stand them up, meaning teach your Talmidim how to think for themselves, that they should stand up. They shouldn't just be passive and not able to think on their own, but the acharayas of a Rebbe is to give them a way of being independent. This is an important thing. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky decried what he called the Chassidification of the Litvische Yeshiva. Chassidim have a Messiah that you have to go to the Rebbe for everything. He said the Litvische Derech was not that way. The Alter Slobodka, they encourage people to make their own decisions in life. But now what has happened is we've become Chassidim in the sense that we have our Litvische Chassidish Rebbes that we go to for every single little question. Like people would ask Rav Chaim Kanevsky something like, this is not exactly what they asked him, but it's not so far. Should I have cornflakes or Cheerios for breakfast? And he would commonly answer, Kirtzonecha, you can do what you want. But if you look at how many Kirtzonechas are in his shuvas, you see that people were asking all sorts of shaylas. They had to have the HaRav Gadol on every little thing. So you could say that's a wonderful maila, das Torah. On the other hand, it's also a chisaron. Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, be maimed your Talmidim, stand them up. So they're capable of thinking. So they think based on the hashkafa and the Messiah they get from the Rebbe, but they then apply it with their own mind and their own keiches. That's the second thing. And the last thing is asu siyag l'Torah, the importance of making a fence around the Torah. These are the gezeres of Chazal. Don't do this lest you come to this. But here, I'm going to stop here because this is a very important point, and I want to devote next week's shiur to this. I know half of you won't be here, but be this may. But I'll just mention it for those who are not going to be here, especially. And that is, on one hand, siyag l'Torah is our gezeros. And of course, the Anshe Knesset Agdela made gezeros. But in a deeper way, a siyag is called Yiras Hashem. The Gemara in Shabbos says on the pasuk, Yiras Hashem hi oitzarai. Yiras Hashem is the warehouse or the storehouse. So says the Gemara in Shabbos, if a person has a lot of grain, but it's not in a protected space, the grain will be stolen or eaten by animals. You have to protect the grain, otherwise the grain gets lost. So what is the protection of Torah knowledge? Yiras Hashem. Yiras Hashem to Torah is like the warehouse or the fence to the grain. Yiras Hashem enables the Torah to remain within you. And therefore, asu siyag l'Torah is not just making gezeros. See, that wouldn't be relevant for us that much. We don't make gezeros per se. But it means your Torah has to be protected. And the thing that protects your Torah, the siyag, the fence, is the Yiras Hashem, the importance of Musar and the like. But here, Rav Chaim goes into a very important point. He says, if a person devoted all of his energies just to building the warehouse and never got any grain, he has a beautiful warehouse, but there's nothing in it. So he was making a point. It's a little bit of a Tainan Chasidus, whatever it is, that if you spend all your time, I'm saying it actually was, and that if you're making all your time on the Musar, on the Yisayirus, on the Devekas Pashem, but you don't then spend learning the Torah, you have a wonderful warehouse, but there's nothing in it. So asu siyag l'Torah, says Rav Chaim, connotes two ideas. Number one, you got to build that fence, and it should surround your Torah. So don't have the Torah without the fence, and don't have the fence without the Torah. Asu siyag l'Torah, and that's Yiras Hashem hi yitzarei. So again, Rav Chaim was very much in favor of Musar, Midais, Tikkun HaMidais, and you have to work on it. And of course, and this is from the Gra, directly from the Gra, who emphasized that. Just to say, although we like to talk about Rav Yisrael Salanter is the father of the Musar movement, but in fact, and many say the Gra is actually at least the Zaidi of the Musar movement, because Rav Yisrael Salanter's Rebbe was Rav Zundel of Salant, who was a very hidden tzaddik. Rav Zundel of Salant was a Talmud Muvik of Rav Chaim Volozhiner. Rav Chaim Volozhiner was a Talmud Muvik of the Gra, and the Gra's sefer, the first sefer of the Gra that was published, is the Perush HaGra in Mishlei, which is about Yiras Hashem and Musar. So it's a davar pashat that Torah requires working on Yiras Hashem and Tikkun HaMidais, but Rav Chaim Volozhiner says that is called the siyag, or the warehouse, and therefore you cannot allow yourself to kind of learn Musar all day and not focus on the actual learning of the Havayas Abaye of Rava. Okay, we'll stop here. Have a good week.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.